This time only documents and only facts. Citizens of the jury, I ask you to lessen my punishment. This is a story to atone for one's guilt through any labor. Don't take my life away. The most notorious crimes of the Soviet era. The 1980 Olympics is remembered by Muscovites for the abundance in store. But the celebration ends along with the farewell flight of the Olympic bear. The capital is facing a return of shortages. Dissatisfaction is growing among the people. Huge amounts of money are spent on foreign communist parties, the war in Afghanistan, and the arms race. The new Akula-class submarines, the largest submarines in the world, are delivering a severe blow to a budget that is already under strain. Meanwhile, the elderly members of the Politburo enjoy going fishing, hunting, and hosting foreign delegations. They behave as if nothing is happening. And only the chairman of the KGB, Andropov, understands that the country is heading for the abyss. Brezhnev is no longer in charge of the country. Who will take the helm of the party after his death? The main rivals of KGB Chairman Andropov are Politburo members Chernenko and Kirilenko, Romanov and Grishin. They need to be removed from the game. Pawn sacrifice is the beginning of a chess game in which one side sacrifices a pawn to gain a favorable position. This term refers to all combinations in which focal points are not considered in order to achieve a goal. At that time, in every yard, domino players would gather on warm evenings. But this gambling game is loved not only by ordinary citizens of the Soviet Union. Passionate fan of dominoes was the all-powerful chairman of the KGB, Yuri Vladimirovich Andropov. 28 bones can create thousands of combinations. The future General Secretary of the CPSU Central Committee was well versed in various combinations. One of them turned into the loudest criminal case of the early 80s. The chairman of the KGB, Andropov, began preparing for a change of power in advance. It was he who provided support to his fellow countryman Gorbachev, who was destined to play a fateful role in the fate of the Soviet Union. Imagine how history would have turned if it weren't for this. Imagine how history would have turned out if Andropov had not supported Gorbachev. If a completely different person had become the General Secretary in 1985, well, for example, the old school parties of Grishin. Imagine that there are still lines for sausage in the stores. There are 4 almost identical programs on the television. On Friday evening, there is a union meeting. You can travel to the capitalist country once every 3 years on the recommendation of the Party Bureau. In May 1982, Andropov was appointed as the Secretary of the Central Committee, the second highest position in the party. He left that office on Lubyanka, shrouded in grim legends. But there were loyal people left in the committee. Any struggle involves advancing, retreating, withdrawing, and making various flanking maneuvers. In the summer of that year, Andropov unexpectedly raised the issue of poor supply of vegetables and fruits in Moscow at the Central Committee. The first secretary of the City Party Committee, Grishin, looked pale. At that time, no one suspected that a major purge aimed at the master of the capital was coming. But Grishin himself already understood that the only chance to survive was to take the position of General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union himself. Red caviar, beef tongue, Trombov's ham, Belichka candies, Severyushka. Now all these products can be bought in any city supermarket. Back then, in the early 80s, access to such abundance was only available to party and Soviet leaders, as well as famous people, athletes, and artists. The ability to obtain something through connections signified belonging to a local chosen. I got the deficit through the warehouse manager, through the store director, and through the art expert. The taste is specific. People laugh at Arkady Raykin's humorous recollections. And in Grishin's soul, as in Grushinsky's soul, people laugh at the humorous recollections of Arkady Raykin. And deep down, they envy the lucky ones who have connections to the right people. Even the nationally beloved artists appealed to the store manager with a request to allocate scarce products. And he wrote notes down. Joseph Kobzon, singer, people's artist of the USSR, member of the State Duma. The popular artist had the opportunity to buy scarce products in the 70s and 80s. Let the bearer of this note, so to speak, have 2 kilograms of sausage and a jar of instant coffee. But in Moscow, of course, there were several stores where shortages were sometimes put on regular sale. First and foremost, it is the famous Yeliseyevsky grocery store. This store was in a special position. It seemed that scarce goods appeared on his shelves with a wave of a magic wand. Like in the tale, The Adventures of Buratino, the door that was behind the canvas, which opened into a magical world. Gennady Kazanov, people's artist of Russia, artistic director of the Variety Theater. In the 1980s, I was acquainted with the management of the Yeliseyevsky grocery store. Yeliseyevsky grocery was like a Tretyakov gallery of products. But the most interesting things were happening not in the sales halls, but in the back offices. From here, there is a beautiful view of the back entrance of the grocery store. It was here that the KGB staff set up their observation post. For several weeks, KGB agents monitored the #1 gourmet. The work was extensive and meticulous. Retired KGB colonel. Operational work to identify the mechanism of theft and bribery that existed in this gastronomy. Behind the door of the black entrance were famous people. Artists, athletes, academics. Black Volgas from the district committee often rolled up. And the late Nozdrikov was in the kingdom of heaven. This is the head of the traffic police of the city of Moscow. Tamara Krasavtseva, in 1982, the head of the department at the Yeliseyevsky grocery store. And the son of Shelikov, Igor, I saw him myself, both Cherbanov and Galina Brezhneva. Galina Brezhneva was involved in a high-profile criminal case about diamonds in the early 1980s. Her close friend, singer Boris Buryatsa, was arrested. The daughter of the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was suspected of speculating in precious stones. Compromising materials on Brezhnev's family members were filed away in secret folders. This was also a secret weapon in the upcoming struggle for power. The police, KGB, and prosecutor's office had long been receiving signals about theft and bribery in the capital's trade. From the Baltics to Kamchatka, rumors circulated about the insane luxury in which the shop workers live. Store directors and food traders with their wives adorned with diamonds. They came to rest in Sochi and stayed at the newly built Hotel Zhemchuzina. I spoke with the head of the Sochi police department, and he told me directly. Vladimir Karatayev, in the early 80s, an investigator for particularly important cases, head of the investigative group of the prosecutor's office of the RSFSR. He says, well, tell them in Moscow, at least let them not wear gold on the beach. While everyone else is swimming in gold, she just drowned $500,000 in Gudkulan. For that kind of money, it's really, a whole treasure. In winter, the wives of trade executives provocatively wore mink and silver fox furs. These people led a lifestyle that was not at all Soviet, but as long as Brezhnev remained in power, they were a caste of the untouchables. Andropov decided to put an end to these practices. A process of merging money with power has emerged, which must not be allowed to happen. At that moment, the director of the Beryoska store, Avilkin, was detained for currency operations. His wife worked as the deputy director of Yeliseyevsky. During one of the interrogations, she confessed, the Yeliseyevsky grocery store is mired in bribery and other violations. At the head of the criminal pyramid is the director Sokolov himself. Born in 1925 in Moscow. In 1942, he went to the front and was wounded. He had frontline awards. After the war, he worked as a taxi driver. In 1959, he was sentenced to a year of corrective labor for the account of a passenger. He then graduated from the Polytechnical Institute and worked in trade. In 1963, the deputy director of the Yeliseyevsky grocery store. In 1972, he became the director. It turned out that Sokolova was impossible to hold accountable for currency operations. Barry Alibasov, producer and showman, founder of the popular Soviet ensemble Integral. I was acquainted with the leaders of Moscow's trade, including Yuri Sokolov. Send him bribery. It was easy to do because everyone was tied up to the very Kremlin. In the autumn of 1982, Brezhnev's health deteriorated so much that he himself was thinking about a successor on whom to make his choice. To the head of the Communist Party of Ukraine, Scarcity, first secretary of the Leningrad Regional Committee, Romanov. On a member of the Politburo, Chernenko. This alarming information was immediately reported to Andropov. Yuri Vladimirovich was seriously ill and understood that there will be no other chance for the country's leadership to rise and restore order. Many remember the war of compromising materials that engulfed Russia in the late 90s. Telekillers were crushing enemies. Newspapers published transcripts of secret telephone conversations on their front pages. It is believed that these political technologies have come to us in recent years. In fact, the war of compromising materials began in the early 1980s. Smolny, a member of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the first secretary of the Leningrad Regional Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, told about the creative work of the Leningrad residents, fulfilling the tasks set by the 25th Party Congress. A rumor spread across the country that the first secretary of the Leningrad Regional Committee, Romanov, I organized a lavish wedding for my daughter in the CPSU. A rumor spread across the country that the first secretary of the Leningrad Regional Committee, Romanov, he arranged a lavish wedding for his daughter at the Tauride Palace. Supposedly, a service set from Catherine II and the reserves of the Hermitage was displayed on it, and the tipsy guests, with shouts of bitter, were smashing priceless dishes on the floor. Later, this rumor was disproved. But then it dealt a painful blow to Romanov's reputation. From now on, he was no longer considered a possible successor to Brezhnev. Among the opponents were Chernenko, Kirilenko, and Grishin. The blow to the capital's trade was meant to bring the master of Moscow to his knees. For the first secretary of the Gorky Party, Grishin, trade was a matter of special pride and concern. Sometimes the master of Moscow would walk into the nearest grocery store, along Kutuzovsky Avenue, and asked, "Why are there no products that should be on the shelves? Meat, sausages, hot dogs?" They say that in one of the stores, the salespeople were rude to Grishin. Not knowing him by sight, the director of the grocery store was immediately removed from his position. And ever since then, under every counter in this store, besides the deficits, there was this photograph stored, just in case. The solitary raids of the master of Moscow could change nothing in the system that emerged in the post-war years. This system was sustained by bribes and shortages. In a socialist economy, the distribution of products, officials were involved with the retail outlets. To achieve an increase in the quota, the store manager was forced to bribe the heads of food trade and the main department. Otherwise, the store received non-selling goods and did not fulfill the plan. The team lost their bonus while the director received a reprimand along party lines, one of the most severe punishments of that time. The director of Yeliseyevsky, Yuri Sokolov, was no exception. He took money from his subordinates and gave it to the management. Sokolov's connections among the party and Soviet leadership were enormous. His friends were artists, athletes, and painters. In particular, your humble servant has addressed Mr. Sokolov. I don't even remember the patronymic because it's Yuri and Yuri. I can say the best things about him. Sokolov was the true master of Yeliseyevsky. I never fawned over the boss. They say that one day, tired of constant requests, allocate product orders to the necessary people, he ordered to chop up the herring heads and send them to Glavtorg. Let him choke. Sokolov was forgiven for this outburst because few knew about the trade, as he. Andropov was not personally acquainted with the director of Yeliseyevsky. He knew about him from the official reports and materials for operational development. But now Sokolov's personal qualities did not matter. There should have been a thread connecting him to the economic education and the party leadership of Moscow. On October 30th, 1982, a Saturday, unassuming people entered Sokolov's office. They presented the KGB officer's identification and an arrest warrant, and immediately pulled out 150 rubles from the director's desk drawer. Sokolov stated that this is a debt that my comrade returned to me, but the committee members did not believe. We already knew in detail from whom he received, how much he received, and the amounts of the bribes. In Sokolov's office, the head of the capital's traffic police, General Nozdryakov, was visiting. He looked on in bewilderment at what was happening. Plainclothes officers explained that the store manager has been arrested on charges of bribery. I remember when I walked into his office, his face was red and puffy. Alexei Filippov, in 1982, the chief merchandiser of the Yeliseyevsky grocery store. Open drawers of the cabinet. The wall behind which he was sitting is broken. KGB agents could have taken Sokolov out through a back exit so that no one would see. But they demonstratively led him through the sales floors. The disgrace of Sokolov should have been seen by everyone. The seized 150 rubles have been added to the criminal case. What is 150 rubles worth now? You'll spend it and not even notice. 150 rubles back then, in the early 80s, was 68 kilograms of doctor's sausage. These are 23 bottles of Soviet champagne, or terrifying to imagine, it's 15 crates of Zhiguli beer. You could return the bottles and get back 60 rubles. And again come for beer. Here is a rough budget plan for an ordinary family with this amount of money. 30 rubles, a bicycle for the schoolboy son of a boltus. Decent shoes for the wife, 40 rubles. 70 rubles for food. There's also a stash of cash. 150 rubles is a decent amount, but it's just a trifle, compared to the money that was circulating back then in LIC. In trading, there are many ways to make money out of thin air. Today, during a routine market raid, police officers are recording hundreds of violations. Back then, in the 80s, trading opportunities were much more modest. In Moscow, there are more and more specialized stores. Sputnik is the name of the grocery store, recently opened on Leninsky Prospect in the capital. But the retail workers did not lose heart. A blue chicken with clawed feet, a kilogram of bones barely covered with meat, the eternally flowing triangular milk carton, all of this became a source of super profits. How did this system work in practice? Here it is. You went to the cold storage area to the butcher, and he would cut it for you. The best pieces went to their own, and the bones and trimmings were accounted for as natural loss, and were sold right there in the sales hall. Vegetables and fruits, meat and sausage, written off but preserved and sold, brought huge profits. Money was flowing outside the official cash register. To avoid accounting, they sold these goods on stalls. Today, this technology would be called progressive. The director who preserved all the goods would be a role model. But back then it was called something else, the theft of state property. After all the profits ended up in the pockets of the workers in trade. On October 30th, 1982, a black Volga drove up to the KGB Lefortovo detention center. A man got out of the car. He was without handcuffs, but he kept his hands behind his back. The attendants treated him politely. He was named Yuri Konstantinovich. Everyone knew he had vast connections. At any moment, a call could come in, release the arrested person. In this case, the black Volga remained on duty at Lefortovo. During the interrogations, Yuri Sokolov insisted that he did not take bribes, and then he completely refused to talk to the investigator. Sov is silent. This was immediately reported to the KGB leadership. General Alenin, who headed the Moscow administration, I hesitated to report this to higher management. No one expected such persistence from the store manager. The operatives received an order, develop the Sokolov environment, to bring charges under Article 174. In Article 174 of the Criminal Code of the RSFSR, there was a note, and the person who gave the bribe is released from criminal liability if this person voluntarily reported the incident after giving a bribe. The deputies of Sokolov were explained. For them, giving testimony is the only chance to remain free. Everyone was very scared. When we called them in for a conversation and talked with them, in their eyes there was simply living fear. The first statements began to appear in the case. When Sokolova was arrested, Grishin was away. Upon returning, he first found out who was handling the case. Usually, such crimes were handled by the BHS, Department for the Fight Against Theft of Socialist Property. But this time, the first secretary of the Gorky Party, I felt an unpleasant chill in my chest. The case of Sokolov was handled by the Committee for State Security. Grishin understood perfectly well who was behind Sokolov's case and where the investigation into trade crimes will lead. But the master of Moscow could not influence the work of the employees, the most powerful agency. He decided to lay low. They eliminated another contender for the position of General Kirilenko. His relatives, during the trip abroad, they tarnished the image of the Soviet person. They visited a brothel. Information about this reached the Politburo, not without the help of the KGB. The scandal was hushed up, but since then Kirilenko posed no threat to Andropov. In early November 1982, rumors reached the members of the Politburo. Brezhnev is preparing a successor for himself. He wants to take the nominal position of chairman of the party's Central Committee, and he will recommend another person for the position of General Secretary. Who exactly? This will be announced on November 12th at the plenum of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Andropov understands that it's time to bring out the trump cards. On November 7th, 1982, Brezhnev, as usual, receives the festive demonstration on the roof of the mausoleum. He stands with his hand raised, greeting the people, and no one suspects anything. In fact, he is saying goodbye. Exactly 3 days after this, Brezhnev dies in his sleep. He takes the secret of his successor to the grave with him. For several days, members of the Politburo have been conducting secret negotiations. Two camps are formed. The old guard is rallying around Konstantin Ustinovich Chernenko. Another camp is forming around Andropov. The ambitious politician Brezhnev. Another camp is forming around Andropov. An ambitious politician is supported by the army in the person of Defense Minister Ustinov and his native agency, the KGB. Chernenko had nothing else besides Brezhnev's favor and a certain position in the party apparatus. The Minister of Defense Ustinov puts an end to the confrontation. He comes to Chernenko and openly states, "There is an opinion to nominate Andropov." Chernenko cannot withstand the pressure. He is forced to agree. General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Yuri Vladimir. I visited the Moscow machine tool factory named after Sergei Ordzhonikidze. Contrary to expectations, the first secretary of the Moscow City Committee of the party, Grishin, he retained his position under Andropov. Other members of the Politburo came to his defense. Grishin had to hide his ambitions, but he patiently waited for his moment. Andropov was seriously ill. Without contenders for the position of Secretary General, a new opportunity could arise. Andropov himself was eager to see the task he had started through to completion. The wave of revelations was supposed to sweep away the Moscow leadership. After the arrest, the director of Yeliseyevsky remained silent for almost 2 months. On December 20th, 1982, he spoke. Sokolov revealed everything he knew. He named the names and the staggering figures. 297,000 rubles received as bribes from subordinates. 187,000 given as bribes to the authorities. His dacha was located in Serebryany Bor. He pointed out a spot in the summer house under the floor where plastic bags containing valuables were buried next to the cabinet. During a search of Sokolov's dacha, 67,000 rubles were found. Then it would be enough to buy 10 brand new Zagels. But Director Yeliseyevsky explained, these funds are intended for the employees of Glavtorg. A whole team was created to investigate crimes in the capital's trade. The investigator for particularly important cases, Karatayev, headed the group, which dealt with Glavtorg and its director, Nikolai Tregubov. Nikolai Petrovich Tregubov has come a long way from being an assistant, from a cook to the head of the capital's trade. In the early 80s, this position offered almost unlimited opportunities. Tregubov arrived at the Kremlin without any passes. He entered the Central Committee building on the Old Square without party card. Traffic jams in the center of Moscow are now a common occurrence, especially here in the Myasnitskaya area, formerly Kirova. Traffic jams began here in 1982. In 1982, it was almost always free here, but on the day when the head of Mostorg, Nikolai Tregebov, turned 60 years old. The road from the main building to the boulevards was clogged with cars. The grateful capital hurried to congratulate the head of trade and present him with gifts. Tregebov does not take bribes. All those detained in the case of Glavtorg insisted on this. But the investigation doubted that, at the top of the criminal pyramid, there is a crystal-clear person. When all the materials were prepared, a decision was made. Arrest his best friend, Moisey Beigelman, director of the Kybyshev district food trade. Beigelman and Tregebov worked together at the district food trade organization back in the 1950s. Retail workers, like a joke, recounted a story from the past. One day, Beigelman, not knowing what else to spend his money on, he came to his patron with the humblest request. Tregebov came and asked him for permission to purchase a car. Just like the president in America travels. Tregebov is cunning and he says, "Mosh, we don't have such a car under Khrushchev, so be quiet." If anyone knew about Tregebov's criminal connections, so he is an old friend of his. To the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist, from the detainee Beigelman Moisey Yakovlevich. While in the KGB USSR detention cell, I speak from my bitter personal experience. Like other scoundrels, I want to tell you what atrocities were happening among the leaders of Moscow's trade. Tregebov's old friend turned everyone in. A wave of arrests is sweeping through Moscow. The isolation cells are filled with workers from the trade sector. Money, jewelry, and antiques are confiscated from the arrested. In this environment, the investigative team is preparing to the arrest of the head of Glavtorg, Tregebov. Since there is no precise information that Grishin went on vacation, so we decided to arrest Tregebov, taking a risk. On the day of Tregebov's arrest, he's unexpectedly summoned to the Central Committee. This information is immediately received by Karatev. The head of Glavtorg is heading to the second square. A car from the investigative team is following closely behind. Grishin is about to arrive. Grishin, to our delight, was late by half a day. And that's why there is such urgency. Tregebov is hiding in the Central Committee building. Time drags on painfully, half an hour. It's unclear which door he will come out of. There are about a dozen of them. It is unknown who he will be. Has the master of Moscow, Grishin, returned already? Finally, an hour and a half after arriving, Tregebov is leaving the building of the Central Committee. When they approached Tregebov, he smirked. "Are you already here? I've heard about you from the Central Committee." The head of Glavtorg was not nervous at all. Today it's us, tomorrow it will be you. Grishin will become the first glazier. I will be released even before the charges are filed. In the General Prosecutor's Office of the Soviet Union, they closely monitored the work of the investigative team on the Mastorg case. But for a time, they didn't. The thunder struck when Tregebov was arrested. The next day, Vladimir Karatayev was summoned to the carpet. The Deputy Attorney General of the USSR wanted to have a conversation with him. The investigator was prepared. Dismissal, demands to close the case and release Tregebov. But Deputy Attorney General Soroka was interested in something else. He immediately asked me who he had given bribes to. From the staff of the responsible apparatus of Tregebov. Naturally, I said it as it is. Tregebov refuses to testify, claiming he is innocent, hoping for some kind of help. The investigators did not trust the management. Even if Tregebov had named the names of the bribers, no one would report this to anyone. But the former director of Glavtorg remained silent. During the search of Tregebov's apartment, nothing was found. Besides generous gifts from subordinates. These diamond earrings were a gift the director of Yeliseyevsky Sokolov, the daughter of Trigubov. Experts valued them at 1,200 rubles. The scale of the cleanup in the capital's trade. It frightens many members of the Politburo. Everyone understands that starting from the bottom, Andropov to the top of power. Meanwhile, the investigation has come to an end. In the case of the former director of Yeliseyevsky. At the hearing, the defendant reaffirmed his previous testimony. Already in the middle of the process, the lawyer realized Sokolova is being led to execution. Yuri Konstantinovich, you should refuse all testimonies. Because in execution cases where there are doubts, they don't allow executions.
Yuri Sokolov. When the court's verdict was announced, a deathly silence fell over the room. Sokolov was sentenced to the highest penalty, execution by firing squad. Until the last day, the former director of Yeliseyevsky hoped for a miracle. After all, it was he who helped unravel the criminal web. But his fate no longer interested anyone. The sentence has been carried out. Unlike Sokolov, the former director of blat, Trigubov, he still hasn't named a single bribe taker from the party elite. He chose to serve his time. He was sentenced to 15 years. In 9 years, Trigubov was released under amnesty. He returned home a broken old man and lived only a year in freedom. It was this person whose silence confused all the figures on a huge chessboard called Metropolitan Trade. And yet, the brilliantly conceived gambit succeeded. However, there was no one left to enjoy the victory. Yuri Andropov died on February 9, 1984. He was never destined to cleanse the party of its impurities and save the country. There are no power struggles following the death of the General Secretary. The frightened Politburo unanimously votes for the old and terminally ill Chernenko. In the hearts of the Soviet people, the passing of Yuri Vladimirovich Andropov resonated deeply with sorrow. Already a month after Chernenko's election, Grishin requested the prosecutor's office of the RSFSR lists of trade leaders involved in the case of Glavtorg. The master of Moscow lamented, "Arrest everyone indiscriminately without even investigating." The hint was understood, and the cases began to be closed. According to the investigation materials, there were indeed connections to the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In 1987, the investigative team ceased to exist. Out of the 68 criminal cases prepared by her, only 2 reached the court. Only one person has fully paid for all the violations in the capital's trade. Former director of Yeliseyevsky, Sokolov. During the investigation, in addition to the confiscated items, they took away, confiscated his frontline orders. So far, we do not know where his grave is, and to all our requests to find out where his grave is and return these medals, we did not receive a response. Former colleagues still remember Sokolov with pain and feel sad. There are no such leaders anymore. A great professional, a big professional, with a capital letter. He both opened the store and closed it. For him, the team and the work were everything. This person, who had vast connections, turned out to be just a pawn in someone else's game. They donated without hesitation. The master of Moscow, Viktor Grishin, was removed from the Politburo and was removed from office during Gorbachev's time. He died in '92 in Sabas, where he had come for another pension recalculation. Soon after the noisy affair in the halls of the Elysee. People were still crowding, but life continued at the Black Entrance. Here, as before, the chosen ones could receive unavailable to ordinary citizens shortages. Everything has returned to its original state. They were stealing cautiously, but they couldn't refuse to do it. Subtitle editor M. Lausova, proofreader A. Egorova.